Welcome back to my channel, Life 4.8 million years ago. Today, we're stepping back into a time when the Earth was raw, untamed, and ruled by survival. Imagine a world without cities, without fire, without speech, only instinct, hunger, and the pulse of life in its most primitive form. The winds carried the scent of wet soil and wild grass. Herds of ancient antelopes and giant elephants, known as Dinotherium, thundered across the savanna, while predators like saber-toothed cats stalked the shadows. And somewhere in this primal world, our earliest ancestors, Australopithecus afarensis, took their first uncertain steps on two legs. They weren't like us, not yet. They were small, no taller than 4 feet, with long arms for climbing and short legs for walking. Their faces still bore the features of apes: protruding jaws, small foreheads, and eyes wide with caution. But behind those eyes flickered the first sparks of awareness. They began to understand patterns: where fruit trees ripened after the rains, which waterholes stayed full during the dry months, and where predators liked to hide. It was this tiny spark of intelligence, born out of survival, that would one day ignite the fire of humanity. Food was the center of their existence. Each morning, groups of early hominids set out at dawn, their stomachs growling as they moved across the landscape. They followed trails of fruiting trees, plucking wild figs, berries, and baobab pods. They dug up roots with sticks in their bare hands, gnawing at the fibrous plants for the slightest bit of nourishment. Protein was scarce, so they scavenged, following vultures circling in the sky, knowing that a dead animal lay somewhere below. When they found the remains of a predator's kill, they waited, watching nervously from the distance. Hyenas, lions, or saber-toothed cats always ate first. Only when the danger passed did they creep forward, armed with stones and primitive courage. They cracked open bones with sharp rocks to reach the soft, fatty marrow inside, nature's original energy boost. It was rich in calories, fat, and nutrients, everything their developing brains desperately needed. That marrow, in a way, was evolution's fuel. They didn't know it, but their diet was shaping the course of human history. Fruits provided natural sugars for energy, while roots and leaves offered fiber and minerals. Insects added protein. Occasionally, a fallen bird egg or a cluster of termites became a feast. Everything they ate was raw. There was no fire, no tools for cooking, only what could be chewed, broken, or torn apart with stone flakes. Every meal was an act of risk. Poisonous plants could kill, spoiled meat could sicken, but trial and error became their teacher, and over generations, instinct sharpened into memory. They began to associate certain colors, smells, and textures with safety or danger. This was more than survival, it was the birth of knowledge. Some started carrying stones with sharp edges, realizing they could scrape meat or crush nuts. It was simple, but revolutionary. With each discovery, their world expanded a little further beyond instinct. But life was not kind. Predators were everywhere. Leopards stalked from trees, crocodiles lurked in the rivers, and the nights echoed with the calls of unseen hunters. When the sun set, fear returned. Without fire, the darkness belonged to others. They huddled in groups, clinging to each other for warmth and protection, often retreating to trees to sleep safely above the ground. The stars were their only light, distant, cold, and unreachable. Yet, even in that darkness, something extraordinary was happening. They began to move together, not just as individuals, but as families, as tribes. Mothers carried infants. Males watched the perimeter. The weak and young were protected because, somehow, they understood, alone they would die, but together they might live. This simple understanding marked one of the greatest shifts in prehistory: cooperation. Their days were short and brutal, but their determination was relentless. Hunger drove them to innovate. Danger made them alert. The need to feed their young taught them to plan. Slowly, their minds began connecting cause and effect. They started to remember where food grew after the rains, where vultures circled, and how to crack open hard shells. They were not yet inventors, but they were learning to think. Each discovery, each adaptation, was a step toward becoming human. The survival diet of these early hominids wasn't just about food, it was about transformation. Every bite of marrow, every fruit plucked from a tree, every scrap of meat scavenged from the bones of the wild, all of it fueled evolution itself. And as the sun rose over the African plains, casting long shadows of small upright figures walking through the grass, the first chapter of our story had begun. Humanity's hunger was no longer just for food, it was for survival, for learning, and for something greater waiting millions of years ahead. By 2.5 million years ago, Earth was changing. The lush forests that once covered Africa began to thin into open grasslands. The climate grew colder, drier, and more unpredictable. The world demanded adaptation, and those who couldn't adapt disappeared. Out of this fierce struggle for existence emerged a new kind of being: Homo habilis, the handy man. Smaller than modern humans but smarter than their ancestors, they carried in their minds a quiet revolution, the ability to shape the world around them. Homo habilis didn't just find food, they learned how to make tools to get it. They began to shape rocks into sharp-edged blades called Oldowan tools. For the first time, humans weren't limited by the strength of their jaws or the reach of their hands. They had weapons of their own creation. With these, they could scrape meat from bones left by predators, break open skulls to reach the fatty brain tissue, and slice through tough animal hides. These tools gave them access to calories that no other scavenger could reach. Their diet transformed, and so did they. Meat, rich in fat and protein, became the secret ingredient in evolution's recipe for intelligence. As they consumed more animal flesh, their brains began to grow. The extra energy from this high-calorie diet fueled the development of memory, problem-solving, and coordination. For the first time, humans began to plan. Imagine the savannas of East Africa. Tall golden grasses swaying in the wind, vultures circling overhead, the distant roars of lions echoing through the heat. In this dangerous world, Homo habilis walked cautiously but purposefully. They watched predator kills from afar, waiting for the right moment to move in. Timing meant everything. Too soon, and they would become the prey. Too late, and the scavengers would have stripped everything bare. When the opportunity came, they rushed in, tools clutched in hand, breaking bones and cutting meat before fleeing back to safety. But food didn't come only from meat. These early humans were opportunists, the first true omnivores. They gathered tubers and roots with sticks, cracked nuts with stones, and learned which berries were safe to eat. They scavenged termite mounds for insects and collected bird eggs from nests. Theirs was a survival diet, crafted by necessity and sharpened by intelligence. Every day was an experiment in trial and error, a lesson passed down not through words, but through observation and imitation. Over generations, they began forming stronger social bonds. They hunted and scavenged together, sharing what little they found. A mother feeding her child with a piece of marrow, a small group dividing a scavenged carcass. These simple acts built the foundation of human cooperation. It was in these moments that humanity's social instincts began to take shape. At night, they gathered together near the safety of rocky outcrops or caves. The African night was filled with the sounds of predators, lions roaring, hyenas laughing, insects buzzing. Fear was ever present, but so was connection. They huddled close for warmth, for safety, and for companionship. The strong protected the weak, not out of emotion as we understand it today, but because survival demanded unity. Slowly, communication evolved. It started with gestures, a pointed finger, a warning grunt, a shared glance. Over time, these sounds and motions began to carry meaning. They weren't words yet, but they were something more than silence. Cooperation in hunting and gathering depended on it. A shout could warn of danger, a gesture could lead others to food. The first seeds of language, the foundation of human civilization, were planted in these moments of survival. Homo habilis lived on the edge of extinction every single day. Yet they were resilient. Each generation learned more about the land, how to follow migrating herds, how to recognize poisonous plants, how to time their movements with the rains. Knowledge wasn't written or spoken, it was remembered, shared, and passed down through behavior. This was the beginning of human culture, the invisible thread that connects generations through shared survival. Their world was dangerous, yes, but it was also a world of firsts. The first tools, the first shared meals, the first sparks of communication, and the first signs of thought beyond instinct. Each discovery made life just a little easier, each lesson made survival a little more likely. The survival diet of Homo habilis wasn't just about filling the stomach. It was about learning, adapting, evolving. They were shaping more than tools. They were shaping their minds, their societies, and ultimately, the destiny of their species. And as they sat under the vast African night, full from their scavenged meal, staring into the dark horizon, they couldn't know that one day their descendants would master the very fire they feared. But for now, their hands, small, clever, and determined, were enough to change everything. From scavengers to innovators, Homo habilis marked the turning point of our evolution. The moment when hunger began to meet intelligence. The moment when survival became strategy. The first real step from animal instinct toward the birth of humanity. By around 1.5 million years ago, a new figure stepped onto the stage of evolution, Homo erectus, the upright man. They were taller, stronger, and far more intelligent than any human ancestor before them. Their long legs and endurance made them the first true travelers of the ancient world. From the hot plains of Africa to the forests of Asia and the river valleys of Europe, Homo erectus became the first species to truly conquer the earth. And with them came one of humanity's greatest discoveries, fire. Fire changed everything. For millions of years, early humans had lived in fear of the dark. The night belonged to predators. Lions, leopards, and hyenas ruled when the sun set. But Homo erectus learned something that would shift the balance forever. They discovered that the glowing embers left by lightning strikes could be controlled, protected, and kept alive. At first, they didn't know how to create fire. They simply learned to preserve it, carrying burning sticks from one place to another, guarding the flames as though guarding life itself. Over time, they discovered how to make it, striking stones together, creating sparks, and kindling them into warmth. With fire, humanity found light in the darkness, and more than that, they found freedom. Their survival diet transformed completely. Cooking made food softer, safer, and far more nutritious. Tough roots, fibrous plants, and raw meat, once difficult to digest, became tender and flavorful. Cooking broke down starches, released hidden nutrients, and destroyed harmful bacteria. For the first time, humans didn't just eat to live, they began to prepare food. Roasted meat, baked tubers, and smoked fish became part of their daily lives. Fire reduced the time and effort of chewing, saving energy and allowing their jaws and teeth to shrink while their brains continued to grow. Evolution, quite literally, tasted good. Evenings around the fire became sacred. Imagine a small band of early humans sitting together, faces lit by orange flames flickering in the darkness. The night was no longer something to fear, it became a time of rest, safety, and connection. Parents shared food with their children. Hunters told stories with gestures and grunts. The warmth of fire didn't just feed their bodies, it fed their spirit. It was here, around those first fires, that humanity's emotional and social bonds deepened. Homo erectus were not scavengers anymore, they were hunters. They developed new stone tools, sharper and more sophisticated than before, known as Acheulean hand axes. These pear-shaped tools could cut, scrape, and carve with precision. With teamwork and communication, they hunted large animals like antelopes, deer, and even young elephants. The balance of power in the savanna was shifting. Humans were no longer hiding from predators, they were becoming predators themselves. Their survival diet evolved into one of diversity and intelligence. They ate whatever nature offered: roasted meat, wild grains, tubers, nuts, seeds, and fruits. They fished in rivers using sharpened sticks, gathered shellfish from coasts, and roasted them over open flames. Their understanding of the environment was unmatched. They learned to follow animal migrations, predict the weather, and settle near water sources. But fire gave them more than food. It gave them mobility. With warmth and protection from predators, Homo erectus could travel into colder climates and new territories. They built temporary camps, used stones to form fire pits, and adapted to environments their ancestors could never survive in. From Africa, they spread across the Old World, to the Middle East, to India, to China, even to parts of Europe. They became explorers before exploration even had a name. Every spark of fire represented progress. Every cooked meal represented survival. And every new territory they entered marked another victory for the species that refused to die. Fire also led to something deeply human: curiosity. Watching flames dance, hearing wood crackle, seeing shadows flicker against cave walls, something inside them awakened. A sense of wonder, a mind beginning to imagine, to dream, to remember. As generations passed, Homo erectus refined their skills. They began to organize more efficiently, dividing roles between hunters, gatherers, and fire keepers. The social structure was forming. The first signs of empathy and compassion appeared, as evidence suggests they cared for their injured and elderly. They had learned that survival wasn't only about strength, it was about unity. And as the glowing fire reflected in their dark, thoughtful eyes, they stood on the threshold of the future. These were no longer mere creatures of instinct, they were beings of reason, foresight, and imagination. The foundation of humanity, culture, cooperation, communication, all burned brightly in those ancient flames. The survival diet of Homo erectus was not just a list of foods, it was the story of transformation. From scavenging raw bones to roasting meals by the fire, from hiding in fear to exploring the unknown, every bite carried the essence of evolution itself.